In the ancient kingdom of Erami, a princess was born with 9 tails, and no one was allowed to speak of what they saw that night. King Rohan had waited many years for a daughter. His first 2 children were sons, strong and brave, but he longed for a daughter, a girl to carry the softness of his late mother, a child he could spoil and protect. So when Queen Lyra became pregnant again, he prayed to every god he knew, both the old and the forgotten ones. The gods listened. On the night the sky cracked with thunder and the trees outside bent from the wind, the queen gave birth to a girl. Her skin glowed like gold dust. Her hair was full and black like the midnight sky. And when her tiny eyes opened, they carried an ancient calm, as if she knew more than any baby should. But behind her, just at the base of her back, something moved. It was soft, it was white, and it was many. 9 white tails, thin as threads but fluffy like clouds and curled. They moved with her breath. When the midwife saw them, she screamed and tried to run. That was her last breath, as the king ordered the guards to seize and kill her. The king stood in the chamber, cradling his newborn daughter with both arms. His heart swelled. After years of waiting, the child he had long prayed for was finally here. She was warm, healthy, and more beautiful than he imagined. Even the strange white tails behind her didn't shake the joy in his chest. The queen, tired but smiling, watched him through half-shut eyes. Her 2 sons, young and full of excitement, leaned in to see their baby sister. But the king knew the world would not be kind if they saw her that way. Only 4 people in the room apart from the king's family had seen the tails. The 2 guards at the door, the midwife, and a young woman named Yene, who had helped clean up the baby after the first midwife disappeared. The remaining 3 were brought before the king before the sun fully rose. He made them swear an oath, deep, binding, and sealed with blood, that if a single word left their mouths about what they saw, they would not live to speak again. From that night, the truth of Princess's birth became a secret buried under the weight of loyalty, fear, and royal command. They named her Elandra. As she grew, the tails became invisible, unless she was having strong emotions like anger, sadness, or happiness. That's when they showed, flashing white and glowing. Sometimes 1 tail. Sometimes all depending on the intensity of her emotions. They would rise and dance around her body, like the wind made visible. The king built a secret wing of the palace just for her, a forested garden hidden by tall carved walls. Elandra grew up surrounded by flowers, birds, and beauty. No one outside the family ever saw her face. Only her nanny, Yene, stayed by her side. Yen was a calm, sharp-eyed woman with steady hands that always carried the scent of herbs. She treated Elandra like her own daughter. She taught her to walk, to speak, to braid her hair, and most of all, to control the tails. She taught her how to breathe slowly when her emotions boiled over. She taught her to close her eyes when anger surged, and how to grip her hands to stop the twitching behind her back. But it did not always work. Once, when she was 9, Elandra ran to greet her father in excitement. All 9 tails burst out like lightning. Over the years, the princess learned to control them more. She became clever and calm. Her beauty grew louder, eyes that sparkled like fresh river stones, lips full like ripe fruit, and skin that never lost its golden glow. She learned to ride horses, shoot arrows, and read the history of kingdoms. But she never left the palace walls. One morning, Elandra begged her nanny to take her for a walk outside the walls, just to the nearby forest, where she could stretch her legs. After much pleading, Yene agreed. The princess dressed in plain clothes, and they left. The forest was calm. Birds chirped above. The air smelled like wet earth. Elandra smiled as she touched the bark of tall iroko trees. For the first time, she felt like the world belonged to her. Then came the sound of feet. They were not alone. 3 men stepped out from between the trees. Their clothes were stained from travel. Faces hardened. Each carried a sword. In a twinkle of an eye, one grabbed Yene by the arm and pushed her to her knees. Another raised his blade to strike. Elandra didn't move at first out of fear. Her breathing stopped. Her hands clenched. She could hear her own blood racing. Then her back arched. The tails came out. Not slowly, not softly. They tore from her spine like a storm breaking loose. White, glowing, sharp at the edges. The attackers froze. They had never seen anything like it. No one had. She didn't understand what was happening, but something inside her had already taken control. One tail swung to the left. The first man was lifted off his feet and thrown against a tree. His body struck the trunk with a crack. He hit the ground and lost consciousness. The second ran, but another tail wrapped around his chest and slammed him into the ground, so hard the soil jumped. The last one hesitated, just long enough. Elandra turned to him. Her eyes locked on his. He raised his sword halfway, but the tails moved faster. He was tossed like a sack through the air. His body hit a low branch and dropped dead. Yene gasped behind her. Elandra stood with her hands shaking and breathing heavily. The air around her was thick. Her tail slowly began to fade, pulling back into her skin like smoke curling away from fire. She looked down at her palms. She didn't know what she had done, but the fear was no longer in her. Something else had taken its place. Yeni got to her feet, staring at her, not with fear, but something closer to awe. Elandra didn't speak. She couldn't. Her legs were heavy, her heart louder than anything else. This power, whatever it was, had been inside her all along, and she had no idea what else it could do. After the fight with the three men, Elandra and Yene returned to the hidden wing of the palace. They were dirty and shaken. The secret garden walls closed behind them. No one saw them return. No one outside even knew they had left. Inside Elandra's chambers, Yene cleaned the cuts on her arms and wrapped her in warm cloth. They sat together under the lantern light, silent, but the truth weighed too heavily on them both. Elandra turned to Yene. She begged her not to tell her father what had happened. Not the attack, not the fight, not the tales. But Yene shook her head slowly. This was an attack, Elandra, she said. They tried to kill us. If we hide it, they might come again. Stronger. You may not be lucky next time. Elandra refused. She feared what her father would do if he learned she had left the protected garden. He had forbidden it, and the punishment would fall on Yene. But Yene didn't care. All that mattered was keeping the princess safe. After a long pause, Elandra agreed. That night, they stood before King Rohan in the royal chamber. The queen sat nearby, her face tight with concern. The moment Elandra finished explaining, the king rose from his throne, red-faced and breathing hard. You let her leave the palace? He shouted. Yene dropped to her knees. I take full blame, my king, she said. Without hesitation, the king raised his hand and ordered the guards to take her. No! Elandra screamed. She threw herself between them, collapsing at her father's feet. If you kill her, I will end my own life. Right here, right now. The queen rushed forward and held Elandra. She looked up at the king, tears already in her eyes. She's safe, she said softly. They both are. Please. The king slowly turned away and lowered his hand. Yene was spared. Later that night, the king sent soldiers to the forest to investigate. They returned the next day with strange news. All three attackers were dead, their bodies crushed and broken, their weapons shattered. The men whispered that something unnatural had done it. Something not human. The king summoned Elandra once more. He asked how they survived. Elandra told him the truth. About the tales. About the power that came from her when she was afraid and angry. The king ordered that Elandra should never again leave the hidden part of the palace. To make sure of it, he sent her oldest brother, Prince Kael, to watch over her. Kael was tall, broad-shouldered, and 10 years older than Elandra. He had trained all his life to be a warrior and loved his sister deeply, but even he could not go against the king's command. He followed her everywhere now. Elandra felt caged. She missed the wind, the trees, the feeling of freedom. She asked her father again and again who the men were, but he never answered. He told her to forget it. But Elandra could not. One evening, under the soft light of a lantern in the garden, she sat beside Kyle and asked him once more. They were from the kingdom of Volari, he said finally. Volari was the neighboring kingdom across the mountains. There had been quiet tension for years. Land disputes, patrols gone missing, traders robbed at borders. But now, this? They sent men to kill me? She asked. Kyle said nothing. That night, Elandra cried alone. The soft sound of her tales moved faintly behind her in the dark. She didn't understand how the men had known who she was. No one was supposed to know she existed. Only her family, Yene, and the few guards who had taken an oath the day she was born. But someone else clearly knew. And if they knew who she was, they might come again. Meanwhile, the king and his troops were preparing for war. Erami had not seen war in decades, but now the battle was now inevitable. When news reached the capital that Volari had broken through the outer defenses, the king rode to the war front with his son Kyle. Elandra stayed in her chambers, just as her father ordered. The city was tense, the king was away leading the battle, and most of the guards had followed him to the front. Only a few men remained behind. The palace was strangely quiet. Elandra didn't sleep much that night. She sat by the window, watching smoke rise in the distance beyond the city walls. Yene brought her food, tucked her hair, checked the windows twice. She was gentle, as always. That night, the wind picked up. The lanterns in the hallways flickered. Yen had left her earlier, saying she was going to get some water. Elandra was uneasy, so she stood up from her bed and went to the window. Then it happened. Her chamber door shook. Once, twice, then a loud crack split the silence as the wooden door burst open. 4 armed men rushed in. Elandra froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The men were rushing towards her when something inside her broke open. From her back, 9 white tails exploded into the air. Light flooded the room. The men flinched, and then she struck. Power surged through the walls, knocking the attackers backward. One man was slammed into a pillar. Another was thrown into a mirror, glass shattering. The third rolled across the floor, unconscious. The 4th man, wounded, dragged himself behind a table, still clutching his dagger. Just then, Yene ran in. She looked panicked, her eyes moving from the attackers to Elandra. She rushed forward, pulling Elandra close and asking if she was hurt. Elandra's heart was pounding. Her power was already fading. Her legs were weak. She didn't notice the 4th man crawling out from behind the curtain, moving slowly but steady. But Yene did. Just as the man was about to stab Elandra from behind, Yene pushed Elandra aside and stepped into the path of the blade. Elandra turned just in time to catch her as she fell. The assassin didn't get far. One tail lifted him off the ground and crushed him against the wall. Yene's back was soaked with blood. She tried to speak, but her voice was too faint now. Elandra held her, pressed her hand against the wound, but it was too deep. Yene's breathing was slow and shallow. Her hand clutched Elandra's dress as she tried to say something. Elandra leaned in to listen. Yene said she was sorry. She told Elandra that it was her fault the men had found the secret passage. She had opened the door and had led them through the tunnels. She said they had taken her daughter and grandson, so she had no choice. They had threatened to kill them, and she never meant for the soldiers to hurt Elandra. She knew Elandra could defend herself. Elandra didn't speak. Her hands shook. Her heart felt like it was breaking apart in her chest. She wanted to scream, but she didn't. She just held Yene close and watched the light leave her eyes. The king's guards, assigned to protect Elandra, burst into the chamber but too late. They had been lured away by enemy fighters who stormed the front gates, causing chaos. It had all been part of the plan. While the war raged outside, these men had one goal: to kidnap the princess in case Volari lost the battle. Now their plan had failed, but not without cost. Yene was dead. The princess was safe, but nothing would ever be the same again. Hours later, the king returned with what was left of his army. The war was over. They had won, but barely. The dead were many, and even more were wounded. Among the captured was a young man dressed in Volari armor. He was no ordinary soldier. He was their prince, Prince Siran of Volari. Prince Siran was dragged through the palace gates. His wrists were bound. His face was bruised. Elandra watched from the corridor above. She had never seen a man like him. Most of the palace guards wore helmets. The only men she ever really looked at were her father and her brothers. But this one was different. He walked with pain in his legs, but there was pride in his eyes. And when their eyes met, she looked away immediately. Later that day, the king held a meeting. He had decided the prince would be executed at the next 5 days. The war had taken too many lives and the people wanted justice. The prince was the highest prize they had captured. After Yene died, Elandra had no one. Her mother barely spoke to her. Her brothers were always away. Her father was too busy with ruling the kingdom. Out of boredom and curiosity, she decided to visit the prince. The king had given Elandra a new caretaker named Mira. Young and cautious, she never left Elandra alone at night. But Yene had once shown Elandra how to mix a drink that brought deep sleep. Elandra used the same herbs. That evening, she offered Mira a cup of warm tea before bed. Mira drank it and soon fell into a heavy sleep. Elandra moved quickly. She wrapped gold bangles and a jeweled pin in a cloth and slipped them into her sleeve. She found the 2 guards outside the dungeon gate. They were young, unsure, and tired from days of unrest. She didn't explain much, only showed them what she carried. The gold spoke louder than words. They looked away. She stepped quietly to the cell. The prince sat against the wall, his hands bound, his face still bruised. He didn't move, didn't speak even when Elandra tried to speak to him. She left and came back the next day, bringing him food and fruit. He still didn't pay attention to her. Elandra just kept talking about random things. She said something funny and caught him smiling. Before long, he started responding to her. He would tell her what Volari was like, its wide rivers, its blue fields, the hot winds that blew in the summer. Elandra listened. Sometimes she spoke too. Not about war or magic, but about little things. Things that didn't hurt. One night, she showed him her tails, the 9 white flames that rose from her back. She thought he would be afraid, like everyone else. But he wasn't. He stared at them with awe, not fear, not disgust, like they were something sacred. Elandra didn't know what to say. After that, she visited more often. She told herself it was just curiosity, just loneliness. But something else was growing too. When the king repeated his decision to have the prince killed, Elandra finally spoke. She said killing him would only bring more blood. Volari would never let their prince die without a fight. She warned that even now, they were likely planning to come back. The war would not end with this death. It would only begin again. But the king refused to listen. So she made her choice. On the 4th night, she came with the key. Her hands shook. She had stolen it from the guard room earlier that day, using another piece of jewelry as a distraction. The guards outside didn't ask questions, they were already paid. She unlocked the cell. He stepped out, barefoot and cautious. He didn't ask her why. She led him to the far end of the stables, away from where the main guards rotated. Her horse stood saddled, ready. She had taken care of everything. He paused before climbing on, eyes fixed on her as if memorizing her face. Then he was gone, swallowed by the night. By sunrise, the dungeon was empty. The guards claimed ignorance. They were severely punished with strokes of cane. They knew it was Elandra. However, they were already doomed even if they said the truth, so they kept quiet. A week later, a message came from Volari. The king himself had written it. There would be no retaliation. The prince had returned. He was safe. And he had made a request. He wanted peace. Months passed. There were meetings, signatures, promises, in order to ensure that the peace lasts for a long time. A marriage between the prince and princess was proposed. For the first time in years, both kingdoms agreed. And when the time was right, it was announced. The prince of Volari would marry the daughter of Erami. When the king told Elandra about the marriage arrangement, she was excited to the surprise of the king. Arranged marriages were often not accepted with such excitement. The wedding was a grand affair. Bells rang for days. Flags of both kingdoms flew side by side. People filled the streets. The skies lit up with color. The two stood before their people, Elandra with her glowing beauty, and Siran with the same strength and aura he carried the day she first saw him. The union brought peace. The war ended. A month after the wedding, Elandra fell ill. Her body burned with fever. The healers could not understand it. Her skin glowed faintly. Her strength faded. Her father paced the chamber, then he remembered. Long ago, before she was born, he had gone to the shrine deep in the mountains. He had begged the goddess of wind and light for a daughter. She had answered, but there had been a condition. The child would be marked, a sign of devotion, and in return she would belong to the goddess, not the king, not the court, not the world. He had not told anyone, not even his wife. He had forgotten his vow. When Elandra's strength returned enough, she dressed in plain white and climbed the mountain alone. She reached the shrine, and there, beneath the stone gaze of the ancient goddess, she offered herself, not in sacrifice, but in service. From that day on, she became more than a princess. She became a priestess, a voice of peace between gods and mortals, a bridge between Erami and Volari. Her tales shimmered with divine light. Her words carried weight no sword could match. And the prince stood beside her, not to rule, but to protect. The girl who had once been hidden became the light both kingdoms followed. Her 9 tails no longer made her feared. They made her unforgettable.